Okay, we are live now. Hi everyone, my name is Yaroslav. You can hear me? Hello, people from internet. Okay, let's start to our stream. Um, for today, I'm going to show you how we are using our particle system in some common use cases, and we will start with some simple scene. It's just our new excavation demo, and let's start to um, figure out how our particle system works. First example will be about some fire effect. I just drop my already prepared setup here, and we will recreate it from scratch. Okay, I'm just trying to speak louder, but sorry. um, I just trying to up the volume, maybe like this. Okay, first setup, as you can see, it's just um, firing something with smoke effect and glow effect. If we dive inside our node reference, you will okay. You will see that this setup consists of some particle system and one light source. I was adding this light source. Okay. I just adding this light source for more realistic effect for the transition between our scene and particle effect. If I switch off this lighting, you will see that transition not so well. Um, okay, let's start with smoke simulation. As you can see here, we have a new rendering features like the um, smoke shadow simulation, shadow rendering, and a normal map. You just barely can see some extra details inside smoke. I just increase value of intensity of normal map to show you these details. And before we have this just this color without some details, but now we can add new detail information with normal map. Let's start to create this smoke. We're starting with creating just simple particle system, and first of all we need to set up our emission parameters and direction for the correct direction way of your particles. These parameters still here. We have direction set up for default settings. All your particles emitting in all random size, random axis, and I just need to decrease my randomness of this direction on the x-axis minus 0.2, maybe 0.2, y-axis minus 0.2, 0.2, and my z-axis I need to set to straight up direction. And here now we have some similar direction of our smoke example. Next setup, we need to change size of our particles and change velocity of particles, because now they have straight velocity value set it by 2, and if you watch on our example, you can see that our particles moving not in the same value of velocity. They have different velocity value. Okay, first of all, now in new update of our engine and editor, we have um, several ways to set up your parameters in particles, and I will choose between constant value setup, and now I have minimum and maximum value of velocity. I just set to minimum just 0.2 and maybe maximum 1.8, maybe like this. Now I have some slow moving particles and some fast moving particles. Maybe I need to increase lifetime and size. Lifetime we will set to maybe 4 seconds, and and as you can see, just now our particles flying further away, flying up, and we just need to increase size of these particles. Size parameter, it's a radius, but I don't want to set straight one radius for all particle instance. I just need to set some range with minimum and maximum value. I need to set I need to choose between constant value setup. Just set it to maybe 0.5. Okay, and now let's do set some parameters in the material of particle, and if we need, we just we'll go back to parameters of our object emitter. Materials stays here in surface material group of parameters, and I will select my material library folder and click to create a child material. I just go back to the assets and rename it to the smoke example 2. Okay, and I just need to rename my new material, new particle system object. Just stay consistent with names. Okay, first parameters, it's transparency preset. We will use alpha blend for this type of particles for the smoke simulation. And first visual first parameter that make more visual effect, we are using albedo texture. We need to use albedo texture, and let's set it to from our texture set. I already have rendered texture flipbooks for our simulation. You can bake it in some different third-party software. It's like Houdini, Embergen, Cinema 4D, 3D Studio Max, and so on. Okay, I just need to albedo. I add albedo to albedo slot, and now you can see we just have some copies of this flipbook, and we didn't see animation. I just stop my animation. First of all, we need to make sure how what exactly resolution have this tile set, text flipbook set. I just selected in the asset browser, and you can see it has 8 by 4 resolution. I just need to set it in the material parameters, but I didn't have these parameters here. You just need to activate animation parameter and set up this size to 8 by 4. Okay, now they have animation. If I need to speed up or slow down my animation, I can use two different techniques. First technique, it's just increase or decrease your lifetime, because if your particle will have small lifetime, they will animate it faster. And second technique is just you can adjust your animation by several times. Now it's set it to animation scale, set it to 1, and our animation just played one time in through the lifetime value. But if you set it to maybe 3, you will have 3 more animation cycles in one lifetime period, or maybe just 0.5. You will have half animation cycle, but we need 1. Okay, and now I just see that my particles flying away by separate particle instance. I want to slow down this this position. I just want to add some impulse of velocity losing effect. For this I need to use linear damping, or all your linear movement of your particles will be slowed down by lifetime. I need to little bit slow down it here. Maybe like this, and I will create some additional dynamic effect. I will push my particle size in the center of movement and squeeze it on the top. How we can create this effect? For the radius parameter, they have additional parameter increase in radius that calls, and if I just will change this attribute, I will have growing effect of the particle in time. But it's just a single value for all particles, and it's not animated. But now we can use our new curve editor, and I will use curve setup, and we'll set it to uh, from this curve point position. I will edit more radius on the start and maybe less radius on the last time of lifetime, and maybe just decrease my maximum value of increasing radius, and we can add here some points, or maybe if you want just create one clear curve, you just need to use your curve radius um, radius tool. I just adjust some curve, maybe opposite direction of maybe like this. Okay. Okay, now we just need to add some animation for the alpha of your particles, because now this alpha just just working only from our texture. Our albedo texture has his own alpha, and we just need to add some animation through lifetime. Now it's just not have blueprint now, but we are working on this type of tools. Okay, we just need to go back to materials, and here we have albedo color type. For default setting, it's just set to just color. It's a color picker with color and static alpha, but I want to animate it, and I want to I can do it from the curve type. Albedo color I set to curve. Here I have my curve editor widget, and first of all I just switch off alpha. Here I have some already set up curve, but I want only single one gray color. For this setup I just select all keys on the all points on the curve and set it to 0, maybe set it to value, set this value to 0. It will be a dark color, and start to increase value, maybe like this, or little bit darker. Okay. And now I can to set up my my alpha curve. I will delete in this center default points, and leave only corner point, and set my alpha animation through the kernel radius. Maybe like this. Here you can see animation through the timeline of your lifetime of particles, and it's normalized to 0 by 1, but it's meaning that it's your lifetime value, but in the range of 0 by 1. I said it's something like this, but for now I need more amount of particles. I just have not so many particles for the collect all these transparent but big stream um, of our smoke. For this I need to increase my particle count. Particle count, set it in the spawn rate parameter. I just increase it by 30, maybe like this, maybe 40. Okay. Next step, we just need to add additional rendering feature. We just need to add our shadows and normal map. For the creating shadow, we just need to set some we just need to set some parameters. First of all, we just cast our shadows from the light source, and we need to switch on our cast from world shadow. It's just a shadow of these particles from our sun. But we will use not only world light source. We will use um, Omni light source, and I will set it on 2. Okay, just now we have shadow on the ground, but didn't have shadow on have no shadow on our smoke simulation. This type of parameter you can set up in the shadow parameter group. It's parameter receive world shadow and received shadows for other our light source type. What we can see here, we can see some cascade of our shadow, and we need to tweak it, set up more smooth transition between shadowing and lighting area. It goes here. We just need to lerp cascade and increase our filter mode resolution. I set it to high, and I will need filter noise here. If I set it to low, you will see these noise filtering artifacts. Maybe on the stream you can see it, maybe not, but I barely can see. Because of that, I set it my filter mode to high. And next parameters, it's softness multiplier. You just can multiply your softness area on the shadow. And we just need to add a normal map to correct our shadow, because now I have just only I just see only complex form of this smoke simulation, but I didn't see inner additional details from the normal map. Okay, let's set normal. I just need to click on normal map parameter, and I have normal slot here. Normal map slot. I just add here my normals. Okay, now I see animation, see some shadowing effect. And of course, in this demo project, they have additional lighting, baked lighting source. We just use not only the sunlight. Here we are using environment probe and voxel probe. And in our material, I recommended you to switch in the lighting part of parameters, I recommended you switch on your use voxel pop parameter. They have additional lighting here from voxels now, and I will switch on my light omni parameter because I'm gonna use omni light source here. Okay, and here we just can adjust some more translucence effect if we want, or maybe not. Maybe set it to more darker. Adjust the translucence from our light source. Translucent depth, it's just offset your translucence area. Okay, shadow threshold maybe. Yeah. Now I have some setup. It's not the same like this, but I think it's okay for understanding some parameters of this object. But if you want, you can tweak uh, your alpha attribute in the albedo color. Here I can just decrease my alpha value, maybe like this. Okay. Next step, we just need to add some fire effect. For this effect, we are using just albedo color and smoke and normal map for additional detail. For our fire simulation, we will use some additional type of texture, because here we have some simulation, but if you look at flipbook resolution, it has only 4x4 resolution setup, and if I just add it to my particle system without some improvements of our new shading system, you will get animation like this animation. It will be stuttered because it has no enough frames in flipbook, and for this type of flipbooks we are using our new feature. It calls motion vectors. We just bake motion of our particles in the additional flipbook, and trying to feel our transition between next frames of animation. Let's create it by our own setup. We are creating particles, simple particle system. This particle system should not be emitted everywhere. It's just particles that stays on on those points. Just they just emit it not only from one point, they emit it from the circle area, and I will show you how it can be set up. I will rename it to the fire, for example 2. And then now I will create material. Oh, sorry, just need to create it in proper folder. Okay, just select and rename this material. For example, and now we gonna do our direction setup. I will set it to 0. I didn't want to move my particles. I'll set it 1, but my velocity will stay on 0 value. Now I have just spot with some amount of particles, and I need to set up material, for example, that I want to see what exact the animation is. I just need to add albedo texture and back to the physical parameter setup. I just add my albedo from the texture set. It's just a Fire5 loop. You will find it in the VFX add-on. All this new simulation we already have released in our new VFX add-on, and you can find it here. I added here. Now we have some circling not animated effect. I will switch on my animation parameter. It's 4x4, but we have some type of fireball, not fireplace. It's all become because we have some rotating parameters by default. It's the angle parameter. By default it's set 180 to 180. I set it to 0x0. Here we have some amount of our particles that I just emitted and stay on his position. Let's change our position type. Emitter shape, it's set it to point. I will set it to sphere, or not sphere, cylinder, and create some radius for this cylinder. Now I have circle area. There I have some particles inside this area emitted. I decrease my particle count. Spawn rate will set to 5 maybe. And now I want to set different size for particles. It's our radius parameter. I switch our radius parameter to between constant value and create some different range for the size of particles. Maybe like this. I set minimum distance, minimum radius to 0.2 and maximum to 0.6. Okay, here now we just need to set our emission and motion vector. I was using for this effect just this albedo color for emission. You can create your own emission color texture, but it's work fine for this setup. I just need to activate my emission slot for this texture. Oops, sorry. And I just need to increase my emission scale. Now we need to set up motion vector. Activate motion vector slot and parameters and move motion vector texture here. after that we just added our motion vector texture, we didn't see some changes because we need to set up our parameters for motion vector, and main parameter on this setup will be scale. Scale here it's velocity of your motion that render it into your motion vector flipbook. I just need to increase my motion vector scale, and I will start to get um, more liquid or more smooth transition between frames. And of course I can add some additional tweaks for this type of motion vector blending frames. You can set you can choose one from two types. First type of blending, it's a current frame and next frame. Opposite side, it's a current frame to previous frame blending. For this type of simulation or animation, I find it handy to set it to opposite side type. And of course you can add some jitter for your texture and maybe some motion blur if you want. In some cases we have um, two additional parameter of your frames sorting with motion vectors, and in some cases it works, but for this simulation it didn't work. But if you want, you can change your motion vector offset from frames. You can move from current frame or from the next frame. But for this animation, for this flipbook, it didn't do any additional effect. Of course, you can use your own simulation, and you can simulate it in our software, third party. Okay, next step, and now as you can see, we just have not correct position of our fire effect and smoke effect. I just drop my fire effect in the smoke like a child, and just drop down my position parameters. Okay, it's set it from 1 point, and I want to render my fire effect on top of my smoke effect. For sorting your different particle system effect to the order of rendering, you will have a sequence order parameter. For by default, this parameter set it to 0 for all particle system, but if you set I need to just group my smoke and fire in some group and drop my fire outside of smoke. If you want to sort this different type of simulation particles, you will need to change your sequence order. And if you increase your order, you move this particle a little bit back to the order of rendering. And now I just set it to 1 and have my fire rendered on top of my smoke simulation. I just move all a little bit up. Okay, next step. We just need to add some ground fire effect. As you can see here, we have this type of simulation. It's just a simple particle system, but it's rendered not like a billboard. It's not trying to follow your angle of view, of your screen angle. It's just a flat direction of emission. It just stays flat. Let's add this type of particle. Create particle system. Just the same setup. We need to switch off our variance of direction. And we need to set up it to particle type, set it to flat. Flat point, just like this, is just a flat area. And we need to simulate, we need to emit in this point in the some circle area too. Just change our shape emitter to the cylinder. And I will set it 0.3 like in our fire simulation. Maybe 0.4. Okay, and I need to set it to the 0 position in our setup, in our group of particles. I set it to 0, maybe move it a little bit down, set it to lower position, and now we just add our material textures, and maybe we'll go back to set up our physical parameters for emitting particles. Let's rename it to glow exam 2, and create material. I just select my material folder. Okay. Let's create material. Already created. No. I will rename it to glow exam 2, and let's set up our first. We will set up our albedo texture for this. Oh, it's not a glow. Sorry, it's it's our fire low, maybe fire low. Okay, I will name it like this. Fire low. Diffuse texture. It's a fire lower D. It's this texture has resolution 8 by 8 particles rendered 8 by 8, and we will set it to our material animation. Let's drop it in diffuse and set up animation. Animation size 8 by 8. Okay, now we just need to add this texture into our emission parameter and increase emission scale, And now we can see they just need to increase our particles and decrease this amount of particles for this effect, because now particles small and they have more particles that we need. I set it to maybe 4. Increase the radius, and we can increase our cylinder emitter shape. Maybe set it 0.6 and increase our radius parameter 0.4 and slightly increase our spawn rate. Set it to 5 maybe. Okay. For now they have this setup, but I didn't um, set up here my alpha, but we need to set up because if you use just a color type of alpha, you will have straight just switching between your frames of animation. And if you need slow if you need uh, smooth smooth changing of your alpha, you will need to set up your color type to curve. Set it to curve. Oh, sorry. uh, let's restart. We just found new bug. Okay, I just need to edit another one. Note for effect composition. Okay, I just will copy it and we'll set up it. In the bottom file here in materials, let's check. Yes, it has a curve setup. We just set it our color to the white color, because it's not have so many effect for the glowing surface. We are using emission texture, and this emission color will cover our albedo color. But I set it to 1. It's a white color, and our alpha will make more effect, because you can just set up your alpha through the lifetime of your particles, and it will looks more natural, more smooth than just a straight alpha from your texture. Okay, sorry for next step. We just need to add some glow effect, and glowing effect I create using two different type of object. I just use uh, my particle system, another particle system, just creating some simulating of glowing area. It's just a particles. And I additionally add some light source with Somni light, and in combination of these two objects you will have some more realistic animation of your firing process, because in this simulation we didn't have some properly fire, it's just a texture, but for the increase your visual realism of this effect, they need to add some lighting and glowing effect. Um, let's add glow effect here. It's just a another simple particle system. It's a point position system. I just need to decrease my velocity. Let's set it to, oh my god, yes, here. I just set it to maybe 0.5, not 0.2, maybe, yeah. And here I need to add some I need to add this particle in the short period of time. It just has a big lifetime period. I just need to decrease my lifetime to 0. My particles lifetime, maybe 0.5, yeah, and change my particle radius between two constant value. Okay, and now I'm going to set up my material, create material, and rename it to glow exam. Two. Particle object I will rename to okay. Now we just, well, in this setup we will using a different type of transparency, because this glow effect we need to add to our our screen color. It's not just a white color, it just should be additive to another screen color. I will set to additive, and it start to glowing because we are adding our white color to screen. Let's move it into our setup, maybe save, and drop our position by 0. And let's add diffuse texture. It's a fire glow texture from add-on, and here we have already some glowing effect, but it's not animated, and our fire glow texture set not animating too. We just for this effect we can animate. It's not so so visible for whole effect, but let's create animation. In next example, I will show you how to work not with animation parameter, how to work with texture atlas. It's another type of another parameter to it gives you to load your different texture piece on your instance of your particles. But here we have some kind of animation, and now I just want to increase radius of particle. Maybe we can add some radius on the spawn. Let's set it to sphere and add some radius here and increase size of particles. Oh, sorry. 0.4, 0.8. Okay, let's move it back. And now we have some glowing effect. If it's going faster when animation of fire, you just need to set your lifetime, increase your lifetime. It's take a slow down effect of our glowing. Okay, now it's looks okay. Next step, we just need to add light source. It's lighting object. I just using Omni light, and now here I set it to dynamic. Here I have already set it in lighting for particles, lighting from light source Omni. But if you don't see this effect, you just need to make sure you activate this parameter here in lighting parameter groups. It's here, lighting Omni. I just move it down. And I need to set up temperature and intensity and maybe power of attenuation effect. Maybe like this. And if I want to decrease my intensity, okay. It's what about light source like a fire? Let's try to make another type of use cases cover. Another type of particles what we are using, it's particles for imitate like rigid body effect. It's a fluid effect or fluid simulation imitation from particle system, and in some cases you will need to make effect looks like a rigid body simulation. For example, you will need to in this excavation demo we just need to uh, just need to add some effect of excavation of soil, and we just need to set some rocks to simulation. But rigid body simulation is just not so fast decision for this effect, and we just can add it from particle system. Uh, I will show you what we already have. Just need to 0.101. Okay. Just enable simulation, but it has, oh, it's not the same. It's not the soil. Okay. Sorry for the delay. I just need to figure out why it's not. Okay, let's do it by our own way. Create particles, particle system. Oh, I did. Okay, I get it. I just stopped my animation in the scene and didn't notice that. Okay, here I have some particles that are falling down, and if I will stop this animation, and we'll see from from different angle of this particle, it just looks like a mesh. This new rendering feature gives us opportunity to create some particle simulation look like proper rigid body mesh object, because this here we have normal map and that's all. It's just a normal map on the particle. Okay, let's see how it looks inside. Just a particle system simulation. Um, it has cylindrical shape of emitter with some radius of emission. They didn't collide with each other. It just dropped down with some direction spread value, and this look of rigid objects, it depends of our shader setup. First of all, in transparency preset, we are using not alpha blend, they are using alpha test, because alpha test rendered in different rendering pipeline. It's not a transparent object. It's working like a polygonal mesh rendering. It's working faster when transparent object, and for hide some texture artifacts, we are using alpha threshold, because we just need to texture like this, with alpha channel, and for covering some texture artifact, I just use alpha test threshold. Mali, I think it's for SIEM ZK version, not for the community SDK. It's about airport assets. Yes, I will show you. Texture, first texture it's albedo, and second texture it's normal map. Just straight baked normal. It's just a set of rock assets, low poly with texture or high poly, it doesn't matter. You just set it to the square area and rotate for different angle and just bake normal map to the plane from 3D assets. That's all what you need here. And in this combination, your particle system will give you this look result. We just we don't use curve animation for this alpha because it's a straight alpha test object, and just use our normal map, and we can adjust normals, increase or decrease intensity of normal. For this object I will set it to 1, and of course we have some shadows here. Okay. But for this setup I want to show you some not only one by one particle setup. I want to show you how our particles can to work together in the different setup of your particle types. I just explain what I mean. For this simulation effect, we will need to add some underneath dusty puffs effect. We just need to add dust in the point of intersection our rocks with ground. And in this setup we need to use some logic, but our particles can work together. It depends of how they set it to in the child parent setup, and it depends of what type of emitter you use. Do you use? First of all, let's set up our dust particle emission. I need some animation like this. Let's create some dust animation, and we just need to use this particle like a spark emitter of another another parent particle system. If you set I will show you on the small example. It's a quick, will be quicker. I just add some white particles. Well, what's going on? Okay. Um, I will add blue particles and add some red particles. And I want to emit my red particles only in that moment. Then my blue particles will intersect some surface. Let's set it to not so chaos distribution. Let's set it to 0. Minus 0 0.1, 0 0.1, minus 0 0.1, 0 0.1, and maybe straight up here. And I want to these particles will be falling down. I just need to add some gravity. I will add on the z-axis -1 gravity, and now my particles start to falling down. Okay, and they will intersect our ground object. Maybe like this. And let's set up our red particles. Set it some. Let's create some burst explosion effect like this. I will add gravity, and now I want to burst my particle, not simulate it in the continuous way. I just want to burst one pack of particles on the one emission step. For this simulation, I will change these parameters. I will set period of simulation to duration of simulation, maybe 0.2, and period I will stay to infinite. And now it just simulate one time. But for this simulation, I will simulate some type of particles, not a burst of in one place. I will add more particles on the start. It's a parameter of number per spawn. I will set to 30, for example, and decrease my duration to 0.1 maybe. Okay. And decrease my radius of particles. Let's set it to 0.1. Okay, now we have some type of explosion-like animation. And let's add our particles like a child into our blue particles. And nothing is going on because we didn't set up our type of emission and intersection with our blue particles with ground. In red particles we should set emitter shape to spark, and now they start to wait in collision from our parent particle, and let's set collision in a blue particle. You can set it in different place, but I prefer and recommend you using a new group of parameters interaction physical and create some physical intersection, for example. And in your ground object, landscape, no, no, in your LMAP, you will need to set. Oh, we didn't have physics. Okay. Yeah, in your landscape, you just need to physical intersection. We just set it. Okay, let's go back. Our blue particles. Let's set collision here, but it's not. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. I just need to set particle physical intersection here, and collision is working. Now I create switch on destroying parameter in intersection. The section is going on, but they didn't see our obstacle. Maybe because I create some infinite period. Let's set it 0. Maybe. Oops. Let's waiting. Okay, I think it's now just trying to replicate big amount of particles. I'm sorry. What's going on? Oh, yes. It's a billion of particles. Um, I just need to restart it. It will be more faster. Yes, save please. Floor is lava, yeah. um, okay. Just a simple particle setup, and it should work. It's not a big deal. Okay, there is our monster particle explosion setup. Let's see. Just spark. Okay. Now it's work. I just 5000 particles. It's too big. Spawn rate set to 1. Yeah. Okay. Maybe 0.5. No, 0.8. Yes, I'm trying. Okay, this setup is represent you um, Spark emission setup. You just set two particle system in the parent-child setup, and your child's particle system should set to emitter shape to Spark, and your parent particle system should set to be collided with object. You set collision, uh, and I set additional destroy and collision parameter, and it works. Okay, same setup we will use for these particles. It will be a child particle with dust simulation and it will be um, our simulation for the excavation of soil. First of all, I didn't recommend you just add um, spark emission for this setup because you will have so many intersection events here. You just will be intersect more time than you need, and I recommend you to add additional same setup like your previous, but they have smaller amount of particles that they emitted in one time. And from these particles, I will create collision and spark effect. Let's drop our dust effect here. Dust particle just a point alpha blend setup with same smoke like in the previous setup of fireplace. It's just same texture set. Only here we just didn't create a black or dark gray color. It's just brown color. Let's edit. Let's reparent it to this particle system and set in the child particle system. We should set emitter type to spark. Okay, here we have some dust emission. Shadow you can tweak in materials. We just can to create shadow threshold, maybe some shadow offset. Okay, and now we add our visual mainstream of soil, of rocks, and it will be work like this in this simulation. It's just another type of use cases for a particle system. In first use case, we are using our particle system to simulate fluid or gas or smoke, and in this particle system we are using particles to simulate rigid body like effect. And for this effect we are using particles in the alpha test transparency mode. Next use case for your projects that you will be faced of, it's weather setup. weather condition. Guys, you are here. You are not sleepy. Sorry for the volume. Oh yes, you can switch off rendering to particles. Um, for these particles, they are just using alpha test mode. I just not sure. You just switch off. You can switch. You can change your viewport mask and set for this camera different viewport mask. But in some cases, you just in this case of alpha test transparency, you just can increase your threshold. Where is it? Oh my god. Alpha threshold. Set it to 1, and these particles will be absolutely transparent, but still work with collision. But if you are using alpha blend, you maybe don't render it in differ buffer. No. For alpha test it's working. Mm, yeah. Okay. So physics simulations. These particles. Okay. Just we can just not to delete our particles. We just set collision, continuous collision. Let's bring me back our visual. If we just switch off our destroy and collision intersection, it will be collect into your terrain. But it has a limited lifetime, and it start to die on the end of lifetime. But it's colliding with objects. Um, okay, let's speak about weather setup. Um, in your project, you are often if this project will be outdoor, you will often to face with a problem to create some weather effect. and I will show you two simple use case for the creating snow and rain area effect. First of all, for weather setup, you just need to understand that you should change three different type of parameters in your scene. First of all, you need to set up your environment settings, your haze, your environment texture, your your lighting, and for the example, I will use preset system. We just have three already prepared presets for our scenes. In first preset, we have custom changed some texture for environment. This clouds is just an environment. But second preset, preset one, has already prepared setup for cloudy, rainy day. It's just a base color texture, me and the light color texture, and some haze parameters. And now we have new haze system. It's just more advanced. It give you more control of your haze. You just need to try to tweak some parameters in this haze system. Haze have some vertical density and horizontal density. It's tweaking in the start height, half fall of height. Now this first three parameters give you more control of your haze distribution uh, in your release. I just will use something like this haze setup. Uh, Second part we will pass. It's just environment setup. Second part, you need to add some material adjustment to your props. For example, if you are creating rainy or snow scene, you will need to add some snow or wet surface effect, of course. Of course, it's on your decision how you will add this type of effects. You can create some texture set for your assets, this snow or that effect representation. But I prefer to use for this quick setup. I prefer to use just decal. We have some type of decals object, and for snow scene I just will use square space decal. It's orthographic reprojected decal. It's just a square area around our scene. It's just one object. It has width at height parameter, and it has radius. Radius it's your level of reprojection. How long you will reproject your how deep you will reproject your decal and onto the surfaces. For example, I set it to 10. It will be like this short area of reprojection. I will set it to 100, and it will cover all my assets in the scene. I will add I already added some fade adjustment because I don't want to create just white surfaces. I just need some variation because it's like a snow effect. Um, this adjustment you can create in the material of decal. In the parameters of your decal, you can choose what exactly you will be cover, what type of effect. You can adjust visibility in different render slots. You can adjust some albedo, metalness modulation, or roughness visibility, or normal. And you have fade, angle, and threshold. Um, Fade parameters, um, you can activate in the fade in the state um, in the state settings. Uh, our decal system can cover your normal map, and if you don't want to adjust your normals from decal material, you just need to set your normal substitute, and it will be additionally it will be additionally mixed with your normals from your assets. I can show you maybe like this. Here we have some normals from our terrain or some vehicle assets or object, and if I will switch off normal substitute, hmm, yeah, now it's in the normal substitute mode. You will fade your normals to the normals in the material of your decal. Let's add some texture. We have normal texture here from the FX, why not? Texture. Let's add some noise here, and in parameters I will transform my UV to 10 by 10 by no 12 by 12. Okay, and you will see here the add our normals onto the asset normals. If you switch off normal substitute, you will you will add you will yes, you will add it in a multiply mode, I think, or overlay. Yes, here we just cover our normals to the normal from decal, and with normal substitute off, we just trying to add normals from our decal material. Okay, let's drop it to default settings. These parameters, fade, angle, and threshold, gives you some variation of your decal coverage. Just a rainy effect here. But we don't have some particles here, and it looks like winter setup, but it's not so realistic, because we have no some snow, properly snow in the uh, in the scene, into the scene. Let's add snow particles here. This already set it particle system. You can add it from add-on, um, but it has bigger snowflakes, and we can change it to smaller size. Let's just change. There, it's gone. What's going on? Okay. Let's change the size of snow particles. I just drop down it here. Just delete my node reference. Let's go into parameters, and I didn't understand. It's just didn't want to emit. Fuck. Take a second. Okay, it's working. Why it's not working when I select this? It's working. Okay. Maybe some logic here inside. We just need to change radius to decrease our radius of snowflakes, and I will explain how we create this snow-like movement of these particles. They didn't fall straight down. They are going to the spiral trajectory, spiral velocity. How we create this type of movements? In your particle system, you have force and noise additional type of effectors of your. They change your particle velocity. First type of force, it's just I will show you maybe here. Yes, it's just a spherical area, the center of force inside the center, and this area can attract particles inside the center and rotate it from different angles. Here they set up some rotation. If I will increase rotation, I will start to rotate it more faster. And if I want to opposite direction, I just change rotator value to minus. Let's add some. Let's increase our particles a month. And spawn rate is set to 200. Maybe like this. And particle, single instance of our flakes, it's just it's just a billboard shape with texture with alpha. Let's try to set up it here. We have flake texture. It's just one piece of snowflakes. It's not animated or atlas of your texture set or flipbook. Just a single piece. It's rendered in additive mode. You can use additive for add some glowing effect because your snowflakes has some translucence effect inside, but if you don't want, you can use just simple alpha blend, but you will need alpha for this texture. We didn't have alpha. It's just a RGB texture. Next use case, it's a rain effect. Rain effect, it's similar like snow effect. You just need to, oh, I forgot. For your custom environment setup, you just need to rebake your environment prop. In this scene, I rebake it, and you will see our reflection and specular effect will change, because if I switch off my new environment probe, I will see my probe from the main setup of this demo. It's just a sunny, clear day, and here I have some clouds on the reflection. For that setup, I just copy my main environment probe and just rebake it. Just click bake selected light. In this setup, it will bake a new environment texture. For snow setup, it's the same setup of your environment. I'm using the same preset too, and here I just modulate, just change my roughness material in the decal ortho surface. I just add albedo black color and create slightly visible black coverage for my texture, because your wet surfaces become more darker. And I create roughness modulation. I just change roughness. And for this setup, you should rebake your light environment probe, because your reflection will change instead of your main setup environment. And particles you can edit from add-ons. Now it's bigger than they need. It's just a giant string of rain. I just need to change this size of particles. It's a radius parameter. Let's set it to 0.1, 0.05 maybe, and we need to change stretch strength parameter, because now it's stretching particles, length stretch. we just need to decrease this length, maybe like this. Okay, and you can increase amount of these rain particles in the spawn rate value. Okay guys, maybe you have some question. I will try to answer you. Vector fields now it's not implemented, but in the future update we will add it. I think I I wanted to implementation of vector fields, but not now. Can this engine be used to make games like the No Man's Sky? Yes, why not? If you have a strong expert team with programmers and artists, why not? We have dual universe clients, customers. Guys want to create pouring rain. Let's create. I just decrease my emitter size and increase my spawn rate to 5000, for example. Hey, there is it. For the pouring rain, you need to change your haze distance view, because you just need some like this effect, and maybe some sky intensity. I just need to add some logic for following my setup to the camera, but in this case it's look like this. And you can increase your roughness, can decrease your roughness in ortho decal, for example. It's increase your feeling of pouring rain. Yeah, vector fields are very promising technique, but you will need some animated vector fields. If you will bake it only in Houdini, for example, you will have just static shot of one vector condition, but you need to animate it. And for this implementation, we need to make our own system for animation vector fields or simulation vector fields. It's more complex task. Yes, you can make your own rainstorm or snowstorm. It's just you need to big amount of particles, or add some additional volumetric, like a cloud. We have volumetric cloud. Maybe some questions for parameters of particles. Hi, Spain. Okay, guys, I think that's all of my stream session today. Sorry for my English. I'm trying to do my best, but I have feel no good today. Maybe it's all because of weather outside. It's not good. Rainbow. I'm not sure I'm sure you the have no rainbow object here, but you can create just or one type of realization. It's a shader or it's just a plane with rainbow texture. Why not? Yeah, your burst effect of we can add some spark effect on these particles, and we will have some sparkling area. But I recommend not recommended to add it to whole this simulation. You just need to prepare another rain simulation closest to the camera, and you can create some contact area with terrain with your rain. You will have some sparkling water. Any question? Can you make fog? Yes, you just see this fog effect. It's just set it up to cover whole area, but you can use another setup. Let's try to set it to just hmm, I just forgot how to set up underneath. Hmm. look like a fog, I think. Yeah, Silent Hill. We just need some character, creepy character, uh, walking inside of this canyon. And you can adjust your color of haze, intensity, and saturation of your color. But now we have gray environment, and color is gray too. Okay, guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking some questions and staying with me. I hope it help you understand our particle system more, and you will find some use case for creating some effects like rigid body simulation, fake, but it's working. Maybe for some weather condition setup, you will have some things. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.